This week we've been looking at turning inward, leaving the outside behind for a little while, and paying a little more attention to what's going on the inside. This can be a bit of a daunting task and sort of scary for a lot of people, but well worth the trip. And when done gently and with a sense of compassion for ourselves, can really change the way that we experience ourselves and the world around us. Hi, I'm Steve from Steve White Yoga, bringing you the application of yoga to manage your health, improve your relationships, and balance your life. Let's take a look at today's session. There's a question. It's a bit of a sort of philosophical question, I guess, which is where does our experience come from? And the easy answer is, well, like from our experiences, from the outside, from the things that occur to us in our lives. And the answer that yoga gives is that, well, experience may start there, but really our experiences are a culmination of the filters that we put on those things that happen in our world as we absorb them, as they come into us. And the Sanskrit word for it, if you're keeping notes on this stuff, is samskara. And a samskara is a pattern, a conditioned pattern. And it can apply to almost anything according to yoga psychology. So it could apply to the way that we walk, for instance. If you've ever had the experience of someone that you know pretty well and you see them like a block away walking, and it's like, oh my God, there's, somebody. It's not because you can see their face, or at least not very well. It can be because of their pattern of movement. As a yoga teacher, you see this a lot in a studio during an asana class. And these patterns continue to impact the way that we feel, the way that we think, and the way that we behave. So here's the starting point then for these kinds of practices. And we're going to have another round today of what we call Maitri, or loving kindness practice, or compassion practice. And Maitri is an incredibly powerful practice. I'm going to have to stop this because I've got something I want to read, and it's down here, so you can probably all see it too. That's okay. So studies on loving kindness, on how loving kindness affects the brain, show that Tibetan monks who had over 10,000 years of loving kindness meditation practice had strangely secure neural circuits for self-understanding and empathy. They displayed a higher level of self-contentment and inner joy than non-meditators or non-practitioners of loving kindness. And further studies in this field showed that during loving kindness meditation, insula and parietal juncture are brain sites that link perception and emotions. They get activated faster than in other forms of meditative practices. So this isn't to say that loving kindness is the best. And it also isn't to say, by the way, that you have to do 10,000 hours of meditation before it has an impact on you. Experience will tell you, if it hasn't already, if you have participated in some of these practices, that the impact, the effects of it can be, I don't want to say immediate, and it takes a different amount of time for different people. So it's a little hard to suggest that in 3 easy steps or 5 days or 3 weeks, it's going to suddenly occur to you that things have changed, but it will. And that's been demonstrated both by science and by the experience of lots and lots and lots of practitioners over time. So here's a quote from Rumi. If you're familiar with Rumi, the Persian poet, philosopher, I think he was a sage probably, from like the 1200s, 1100s, 1200s, if I'm remembering right. Brilliant stuff. He said, maybe you're searching in the branches for what only appears in the roots, which sort of speaks to what we're going to do today with our loving kindness practice. I don't know about you, so I'm just going to bust myself There have been occasions in my life where something has happened and I blamed somebody else. I don't know if this has ever been your experience at all, but it can happen in the human experience. And in fact, sort of depending on your disposition, different people uh, tend to blame more quickly or more readily than others. I know a few people who blame anything that goes wrong on somebody else. There are certain political figures, without naming any names, who have a tendency to do that. So it's not an uncommon trait. And in yoga psychology, they would suggest that this is just a deliberate attempt to protect our own ego. I think Western psychology would probably say approximately the same thing. But this is sort of going to be our focus today, is this idea of taking the responsibility for what happens outside of ourselves. Now, I'm not suggesting that the alternative is to blame ourselves. That's silly. And in fact, you may know people, and I do, and I'm guilty of it myself even. I sometimes take the blame really readily for things that happen. So it isn't about blame at all, really. It's about accepting that things happen and recognizing that whether it's me or whether it's you or whether it's somebody else in my life, we're all just people who are, walking around on the planet trying to do whatever we were trying to do. A more direct way of saying the same thing, if you know Zig Ziglar, he's long deceased, I think, but he was a famous motivational speaker. Some people find fault like there is a reward for it. It's sort of a game for some people almost, I think, to find somebody to blame for something. So to a greater or lesser degree, I think we're all, I don't even want to say guilty of it. We all engage in this behavior. And so that's sort of what we're going to work with today. This is one of my favorite quotes from Emerson. The louder he spoke of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons. Emerson has a brilliant way with words. And the suggestion is just that, we all have our stories about who we are and about who everyone else is in our world. And sometimes those stories are fairly accurate. And sometimes, going back to our experience of life, they are filtered through a series of conditioned responses, behaviors, thoughts, feelings. And so whether we're thinking of ourselves or somebody else, it is not necessarily that we're embedding ourselves in the truth, but in the version of the truth that makes us most comfortable, I suppose. So enough of the psychology. This is our process, and this is not new to those of you who have been around for a while. When we sit down in a mindfulness practice, one of the things that we can do is to notice our patterns of thought or emotion or action. We can allow during practice, without prejudice, the validity of those patterns. I mean, they exist, whether they're right, wrong, good, bad, whatever. We're just trying to observe them, to become aware of them. And then we invite them into an environment of open curiosity. So it's kind of like, I've kind of got this crazy habit going on, and I've been doing it my whole life, and I never really noticed it in this light before. So it's this idea of almost in a scientific way, creating an unbiased perspective or a third-party observatory perspective, observational perspective. And then we can place these things into the context of compassion. And so that's what we're going to do today. So you want to settle in, get comfortable. And when we say comfortable, as I think you guys all know, I think everyone who's signed up today has been with us a number of times before. So, this is an alert, but relaxed posture. And begin to establish your space. You can close your eyes. Feel your foundation. And begin to allow the breath to consume more of your attention. So start to focus in wherever you may experience it in your being on the nature and quality of the inhale and the exhale. And as you're settling in, you may find that your focus drifts, which is a very natural part of this process. So when you notice that, give it recognition and then return your attention to the breath. As with anything in life, the more fully we focus on, let me say it differently. The more intently we focus on something, the more details we can start to discern. And this applies to anything that we choose to, kind of set our minds upon, whether it's a hobby or a problem or a person. As we uncover the details of a person, that could be good or bad, I suppose. So, likewise, begin to sort of delve into what haven't you noticed before about the breath. See if you can find something new, have a new experience of it. In Buddhism, you may be familiar with the expression Zen mind, beginner's mind. So each experience is its own without relating to any previous experience. All right, let's go through the rest of our anchors one by one. So shift your attention for a moment, if you would, and experience sensation. So most often we say to do so in the hands and fingers, just because there's a lot of neural response coming from the hands and fingers. But that's not the only part of the body. For instance, the feet also have an overabundance of neural receptors. So I invite you, you can stick with the hands and fingers if that's most comfortable for you, but I invite you just to sort of spend the next few moments to explore, if you wish, and find sensation, receive the information from some other place in your body. As attention drifts, notice that. And once recognized, gently guide it back to rest in sensation. And now let's make our third shift and focus on sound. You might even consider the spaces between sound. You might even take into account sort of the lack of sound. You're probably not in an isolation chamber, but if you have in your environment some silence, you might bring that into your field of awareness. All right, and then we'll spend just a few more minutes focusing on the anchor. And so I invite you to choose whichever of the three is most appealing to you, seems to speak to you most today. And for just a minute or two, engage in the practice of resting on the anchor, recognizing uh, a meandering mind and returning it. Our effort in training or retraining the mind. All right, let's get into the meat of this, shall we? So, I'd like you to consider a situation, probably one that's recent, but it doesn't have to be necessarily, but a situation where you can identify that you engaged in blaming. And let's choose, let's say, someone as opposed to a thing, like the virus. You could blame the virus for a lot of things, but uh, narrow it down to somebody specific, some specific individual. And again, as we always caution, it doesn't have to be, the most traumatic thing that's ever occurred to you. It can be something that's fairly benign, in fact. The effect of the practice is the same no matter what. So don't feel encouraged or feel it necessary to find something that's like the worst thing that's happened to you this year. So as you bring that situation into focus, we'll go through our process of getting out the movie projector and hitting play and running the tape. So what led up to this situation where the blame button was pressed? And as you arrive at that point where you thought or felt, and probably both thought and felt something, where you decided that blame was in order at some level of your being, you made that decision. And that there was then some story that inevitably started to unravel or unwind about this other person. So at that point, can you sort of embody those feelings, that sense of whatever it was, anger or betrayal or hurt or disgust, whatever it might have been? Now, as you stay with that, can you find some place in your body, or places for some people, where it is embodied, where you actually feel the sensation of that emotion? And I'll just point out the usual suspects. It would be facial muscles, jaw, throat, chest, belly or gut, even lower into the pelvic bowl. For some people, the response comes in the extremities, in the hands and the fingers, even toes or feet. So if you can locate that sensation, stick with it for a moment. And begin to offer it some space. So allow the breath to be the carrier of a little opening, a little loosening. Imagining that you're actually taking the energy of the breath and placing it in that space, that place of tension, that place of restriction or constriction or tightness. And it may be possible for you to apply the exhale as a basis for beginning to shave off and release some of that stress, some of that tension, some of that restriction. So the inhale creates space. The exhale creates release. And I would ask you to remember that this is a practice. So if if first of all you're not finding much embodiment, or secondly you found the embodiment but the breath doesn't do much to it or for it, it can take some continued work. It's a very viable means of starting to deal with difficult emotions which become embodied. But it's not necessarily a magical formula that, you take the pill and suddenly you feel better 15 minutes later, although it does happen that way too. So I'm just suggesting that in the event that this hasn't provided a particular sense of relief, that you should keep working at it. All right. Go ahead and relax that effort if you would. Come back into your breath alone, or your sensation or your sounds, and just spend a few moments sort of reorienting as fully as you can back into your anchor. All right, beautiful. Let's begin part 2, which is to actually exercise our Maitri, our loving kindness. So if you would, you can begin to repeat the words to yourself in silence and with as much awareness, integrity as possible. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be healthy. And then if you would turn your attention to the villain, to that person who received your blame. And even if it doesn't carry the full conviction of sincerity, may they be peaceful. May they be happy. May they be safe. May they be healthy. May they be peaceful. May they be happy. May they be safe. May they be healthy. And appreciate that, what we're doing here is not the same as forgiveness necessarily. So don't get the impression that you're being forced to try and forgive someone. I mean, people do bad things. And forgiveness process is a different process. And it may occur as a result of a loving kindness practice. But all we're really doing here is recognizing that in some great vast sense, we're all in this boat together and dealing with experiences differently, maybe not always appropriately, but nonetheless, we're just a bunch of animals on the planet struggling to get along. Which leads us to the third part of the Maitri practice, which is a wish for all beings. May I and everyone be peaceful. May I and everyone be safe. May I and everyone be happy. May I and everyone be healthy. May I and everyone be peaceful. May I and everyone be safe. May I and everyone be healthy. May I and everyone be happy. Find your anchor for just one more moment. And then relax your effort. And know this, that my encouragement for spending 10 minutes is that you commit for the next few days to a practice just like this of compassion. It doesn't have to be the exact words that I've used, so don't feel like, well, I don't remember what he said. You can make it up as you go along, as long as it's kind, and you get the idea anyway. So I would encourage that over time, this can be an incredibly powerful practice to bring a greater sense of peace first to yourself, and then gradually to others in your world as well. If you're interested in a book recommendation, sure, I've got one, The Art of Authentic Connection by Sharon Salzberg. Sharon is a very famous Buddhist practitioner, lecturer, and obviously author. Thanks for joining me. For more great videos like this on Yoga Beyond the Mat, please check out my YouTube channel. And for further information, you can go to my website, stevewhiteyoga.com. Until next time, keep on breathing.